Hi, Aditya. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hey, Grace. Thanks for having me on. Excited to chat.
To start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you started your career as a, I would say like as a software engineer at Twitter. I don't know if this is like actual first job, but like, and then you have worked at like some iconic companies like Nextdoor, Palantir, and you have invested in like various like top, I would say AI companies in my opinion, like for example, Glean together or, Wisdom AI, which is our top 100 list. And then Soham and Arvin both were on our pod. And maybe we could start with like, what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shape you into who we are today?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say at Palantir, I was writing code and did the job of a forward deployed engineer, which is in vogue today. And it gave me an appreciation, I would say, for just customer understanding and figuring out like where value truly is. And then more than that, I would say Palantir was underrated at the time for the quality of software that it built. A lot of what has gone into the platform today um, is stuff that was cutting edge and stuff that has been unbundled into valuable startups over time. So for me, I would say just develop my taste in good enterprise software, and I think that has served me very well in
Mhm,
terms of identifying products that I think can move the needle,
mhm,
and then just like having a high bar for quality.
mhm. For sure. I wonder, so maybe we could talk about like what is forward deploy engineer for you?
Yeah, so that term is used a lot in today's day and age, right?
Now it's like forward deploy angels, forward deploy everything. I
I
mean,
know, I know, which is funny because at the time Palantir was laughed at by
mhm,
many people for being a services company, right? And they would, in fact, many people would dismiss the forward deployed role. Uh, I would say that there's a fine line between solutions engineering and forward deployed engineering.
mhm,
So if you look at what Palantir did, the profile of forward deployed engineers was the same profile as people writing software, core
mhm,
software for the platform. And
mhm,
the reason for that was they wanted people who could build like unique pieces of software on top of the core platform primitives
mhm,
to close the gap between the platform and customer value. And
mhm,
then the job of an FTE was to also be very good at talking to customers and figuring out their needs and then building towards that. So you just weren't, sitting in a cushy office and writing code. You had to be constantly iterating with the customer, which meant that you had to have a certain level of EQ to figure out how to get how to build a good relationship with them and figure out the nose for value. And then the last thing I'll say is that you had to sort of operate like a product manager in terms of figuring out, hey, from what you've built, how much of this feels like it's custom for this specific customer versus what can be put back into the platform and generalized across many different customers. And that was the key, right? That closed the loop and created this flywheel where,
mhm,
with all of these different enterprise accounts, with forward deployed engineers building things, the core platform ended up developing at a very rapid pace and in a way that it would then compound and then apply to, many more customers over the next iteration. And that was extremely cool to witness.
mhm. I wonder, maybe we could talk about like, since I feel like you started your career as a coder, which kind of like give you the visibility of like a lot of like coding related tools. How maybe we could talk about like how do you kind of like meet the Glean team and not the Glean team particular, but like it's more of like the rubric mafia. I feel like they like each of them like went out to start their own like company. And I feel like nowadays, like, Arvin was on the pot and then Soham was on the pod, and then like the other day, I met the other co-founder. I think it was VJ at the Wall Street Journal thing. Maybe we could talk about like how do you kind of like meet them, and then I feel like convincing them to like get I kind of put money in because they are like second time entrepreneurs. They have like huge success, which is like IPO company. Like how do you kind of like basically establish the trust and the relationship to like make sure that you can like investing into the company as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, on Glean, what I'll say is that that was credit to my partner Mamoon. He's the
Mhm,
one who led the Series A investment along with Lightspeed back in I think 2018, late 2018, early 2019. And Arvind at the time was leaving Rubrik and wanted to build an enterprise search product,
mhm,
which was in the realm of SaaS, and that's where Mamoon is a specialist. So he and Mamoon really hit it off, and I think Mamoon from his prior experiences had identified that despite this market at the time not being considered a good market, there was a need for something like this for every enterprise. And from there, I think Arvind built the first product, and even had 10 to 15 folks at the Kleiner Perkins offices, working out of those offices for about a year and a half before they spun out. So that was the start of our connection with the rubric mafia, you could say. On my end, when I started at Kleiner Perkins, within my first 2 to 3 months, I was in touch with one of the Wisdom AI co-founders, Kapil. I had heard from a friend that he was working on a new company, and at some point he told me that he was joining forces with Soham. And from there, I got to know Soham and built this really enriching 3-year-long relationship where I was tracking the company for a while, helping them out with various things, and it all culminated in the Series A that we announced not too long ago. And I think, well, you should ask Soham this, but my understanding is that Soham appreciated my experience at Palantir, and then I demonstrated a fair amount of understanding of their business, what they were trying to do, along with having made valuable introductions, which is why he picked me to lead it, and I'm very grateful for that. And then we just announced an investment today in a company called Maxima, which is, funnily enough, founded by another rubric alumni, this individual named Yogi Goyal, and he's building an agentic platform for accountants. And I was introduced to him via the Wisdom AI folks last year. So you can see that it all kind of ends up compounding in its own way once you get to know the key folks from a certain company.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I wonder, maybe we could talk about like how do you kind of like tracking like mean in the past like 3 years, because I think like they had very, I guess like one thing is like I feel like they like what's the best way to put it? I feel like they are like very successful, and that I feel like if as an angel, sometimes like I feel like to back on the second time founder, it's just like an entry scheme as like can you really put money like winning the deal is like the biggest kind of like hurdle because of they are popular, and they probably have like a lot higher valuation and stuff. But I wonder for like when you're tracking, what were something that you're actively doing to kind of like I guess quote unquote add value, or like what are something that you are screening to like kind of vet the deal as well, because I think making a Series A investment is a lot more that like making a seed investment. There's like a lot more data towards it, and then like what were something that you were seeing that like you feel like could show that like they could raise a significant like Series B and stuff.
Yeah, so maybe let's take the Wisdom AI example. Because with Maxima, as I mentioned in my post today, we issued a term sheet in 24 hours, and that was just because it was a seed investment, and we were just blown away with the clarity of thought that Yogi and his team demonstrated. So that was a different case. With Soham and Wisdom, I'll say in terms of tracking, I would check in, let's say, at least once a quarter. And those check-ins, I would spend a lot of time with Kapil and then with Soham, just talking about how things are going, offering my perspective on the business, where the market is trending. And I think with these things, you have to hope that what you're saying resonates with the founders, right? Ultimately, this is a business of connecting with founders, and some founders want certain things, others want maybe appreciate a good back and forth and good perspective. And it seemed like in this case they did value that perspective. So that was the foundation of the relationship, where I think they realized that, hey, I mean business, I understand exactly what they're doing, I speak the same language given my time at Palantir. That was the foundation. And then I layered that on with valuable introductions over time. Those introductions were from my personal network. Eventually they were from the Kleiner network, and they were in the form of customer introductions. And then I would relay that feedback, synthesize it, and share it with them. So I think all of this is just relationship building and giving far ahead of when you can even ask to get something in return. So I think it was just, and then maybe the third piece of this is just connecting at a personal level, right? Like this may not be the case with every second-time founder, but I just think we also connected at a personal level. I mean, I've always respected Soham and Kapil for how humble they are, despite despite what they've accomplished, and I like to think vice versa, that they appreciated my style of communicating and just like being around them versus maybe others. But yeah, so I think you are taking a little bit of a leap of faith and betting in yourself when you're spending time with these second time founders. But again, if you believe in your own skill set and your own knowledge, then it should work out in the end. And in terms of how you vet the opportunity, I think it's like any other opportunity where you have to have a pretty sharp point of view on a space. And at Kleiner, we've prided ourselves in backing companies that are reinventing
Mhm.
existing categories or maybe even creating a new category. And in Soham's case and Wisdom's case, they are seeking to reinvent a very big market. And I think that became clear when we saw the product.
Mhm.
So we can talk about why this things need to change, blah blah. But when we saw the product, that was when things truly crystallized, and it felt like, hey, this seems like the future of what is a very large market. And that's when and I'd already got a taste that things were working because I was talking to a couple. He was telling me about certain enterprise accounts that were expanding very nicely. That's typically a good sign of early PMF.
Mhm.
And it just clicked once I saw the product. I was like, okay, I can see why things are starting to work. You built a product that makes all the sense in the world to me, and there's more to be done. But if you can continue to invest in this direction, then you can have a very, very big company in your hands. So we knew the team was great, right? So like, I think it was just a matter of, can they build the right thing? And once we saw that, we were all in.
For sure. I wonder, maybe we could talk about like the trends that you're seeing in the space, and then you are seeing that like you guys back like the reinventing um the I guess like the different categories. So maybe we could talk about like, for example, you mentioned about like Maxima is about accounting, right? So like what are, let's call like three top area that's on your mind that like you feel like needed to be reinvented right now, that's like super ripe opportunities. And then maybe we could talk about like the sourcing funnel as well, because I think sometimes you think about, a particular area that's like needed to be reinvented, but it's like also like there's like a lot of existing players, or maybe it's just like very hard because I see. So for example, yesterday I hosted another dinner, and then like a lot of like the current batch YC founder were there. I remember like meeting people that were like trying to reinvent in the restaurant perspective. Like, so it's basically like, think about like basically an Airtable for like restaurant or something, and then like it just I feel like it's very difficult for restaurant or like a specific traditional industry to kind of like adapt new tools. And then same as like I think the first time I tried with like the people who are trying to do like legal slash like the chat GPT version of like legal to like fight tickets or whatever, like, but nowadays it's like back in time it was like not very successful, but like nowadays it's like very popular category as like people seeing the success of like Harvey, GCAI, blah blah. But like I wonder, how do you think about like which industry should be disrupted, and then how do you kind of like source a deal from the existing, really, whether it's like a power network from like Mamoon's network or your network, or just like trying to find people that are like net new to like kind of incorporate them into the portfolio.
Yeah. So great question. um, I think it's twofold. One aspect of this is from my prior experiences, right? So I can talk about like two companies that Wisdom is one of them that has come out of prior experiences. For example, I was an engineer, and I've always believed that like all aspects of the engineering lifecycle are up for grabs, right? With AI, and then the question is, which aspects of this can produce a standalone company? Because not all of it, some of it can change, but it may not produce a standalone startup opportunity, right?
Mhm.
And code generation was one, which we are, my colleague Lee Marie and Kleiner Perkins ended up investing in Windsurf. And the second piece of this was the SRE category, which is, once you've pushed all this code into production, systems are running, can you leverage AI and agents in particular to help people debug and fix systems when they go down?
Mhm.
And arguably, systems will be much more unreliable over time with this increase in code throughput, because a lot of what's going to be making it to production is code that people may not fundamentally understand. And so that was the genesis of the thesis. And also, as someone who has been up at night trying to manually debug systems and play the role of an SRE at different points in time, I knew the pain. Like, this is if you can tell an engineer, hey, let AI go figure out what went wrong and over time actually fix it for you, any engineer is going to buy this. Like, and I think and so I wrote a mini thesis on this space in March of 2024, which is, hey, there is an opportunity to reinvent the way You can call it on-call operations, you can call it site reliability, but there will be an opportunity for a company to reinvent this space. And for the right company, you can lay claim to observability budgets, and over time, and we're talking a decade, hopefully be a company as big as Datadog with this as the wedge. So that was one example, and that led us to our investment in Traversal. This is a company these are the founders I'd been introduced to from another founder friend, and I'd seen them at the seed round. We had built a good relationship, and and concurrently to publishing this thesis, I very quickly landed on them as the player I wanted to back. So that's Traversal. And then with Wisdom, it was from my experience with at Palantir. I saw the magic that data tools could provide to users, but they always felt incomplete and they always felt like an older generation. So when I saw Wisdom's product, to me it felt like the next evolution of how the space should be changed, and the next evolution of product here. Sometimes we take a little bit more of a tops-down approach, and one example of this is we've generally said we should be trying to back application companies that go after highly paid individuals whose skill set is in scarce supply. And that led to us investing in Harvey, right? Like lawyers are highly paid, their skill set is in scarce supply, and there's a good amount of work that they do that is ripe for automation. Harvey is square in that thesis. Ambience Healthcare, that's for doctors. Windsurf for engineers. So that's like another way that we converge. And I think you're getting to a very deep question in terms of how do you then pick. I think that's an art. Like sometimes you get it wrong, but I think you have to have a very clear answer for questions like what's the why now, and have a very clear answer for why does this deserve to be an independent company.
For sure. Maybe we could dive deep into, since like you just launched the investment of Maxima. Maybe we could start with like, can you give us like the kind of like the background of like, for example, why you feel like, in the like how is the industry kind of shift, and then it kind of like you feel like the enterprise accounting needed a new tool to like how does the money flow in the industry on like what they're selling to, or like how big of a ticket they could be selling on, like I guess like what are some kind of major trends that you're seeing in the industry and maybe enterprise accounting.
Yeah, for sure. So I think so. Every enterprise has accounting teams, and accounting teams are the folks who keep the financial information on track, right? So they're responsible for closing the book and running all sorts of scenario planning analysis for budgeting. And you just cannot live. Any enterprise cannot live without accountants, right? And eventually, when a company is preparing to go public, there's a lot of work to be done under the hood. And when the company is public, there's so much reporting. At the same time, there's generally a net decline in the number of accountants entering the workforce, and the reason for that is on one end, people are not as interested in pursuing accounting as a profession versus others, but then people are also churning out of the profession because it can be very stressful, right? You're an accountant working at a pretty big company. You have all of these like transactions that are happening that the business is incurring. Your job is to literally sit and reconcile those transactions. It's called the month-end close, and you do this every month. It's a very, very stressful job. And so then the natural question is, can we supercharge them or even eliminate this stress with AI? That's the genesis of the thesis. Again, you have all the tailwinds, right? Like there are less folks entering the workforce, which means that enterprises will be even more keen to spend on software that can make their existing workforce more productive. This is a problem that the accountants themselves care about because no one wants to do this kind of work. So then the month-end close felt like the right wedge for a startup to pursue. And then the other thesis was that if you can play your cards right and own a valuable aspect of the financial data that a company has, you can then layer on more products in addition to the month-end close, flux analysis and various other modules that can then allow you to start looking like, let's say, a Rippling, but for this space. And of course, a lot of the product is powered by AI. And maybe if you get very lucky and you play your cards right, you can own the ERP, which is the underlying system of record. Because the ERP, there are many startups going directly after the ERP, and they're doing well as too, but that's going to be a little bit of a harder sale because there are companies like NetSuite that are very well established in the enterprise, and it's generally hard to take a system of record out. Maxima is going after the laborious work that people are performing They're going to layer on more and more modules that continue to be a system of intelligence, and over time they will be a system of record.
I wonder, so like maybe we could talk about the that from like the team, and then like how like your thinking framework on like the team that
Yeah,
will help it succeed, because
yeah,
I just opened like, the two of the three co-founders are like very technical. So like one's like a director from like Netflix, one's from like VP from Bold. Obviously they're like great brands. And so maybe we could talk about like, what do you think make a great like AI
yeah,
startup succeed?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and let's take Maxima as an example, because ultimately it is the team that builds companies, right? So with Maxima, and the team, by the way, is the biggest reason why we made this seed investment, and we gave them an offer in under 24 hours.
Mhm,
So this is a field where you have to have some depth of understanding of the life of an accountant, and typically that comes from having done the work of an accountant. The
mhm,
CEO is an individual named Yogi Goyal.
mhm,
He's a certified accountant and then also worked at Rubrik as an early finance hire all the way until they went public.
mhm,
So he has lived and breathed the problem of corporate accounting for many, many, many years.
mhm,
And that showed when he pitched us, because when he pitched us, he had this, presentation that I thought was beautiful in terms of the clarity of thought. Like he walked through all aspects of the problems, kind of walked through what were the solutions that he had explored and why he had landed on, let's say, month end close as a starting point. What can a company become if they solve month end close? And he painted the picture of all the modules he wanted to build
mhm,
and the eventual end state to being, a $30 billion company. It all just made sense. And it showed that Yogi in particular, he's non-technical, but he just understands the problem so well. And then Akshaya and Jack, the people you're referring to, they have very, very strong technical backgrounds. Akshaya was at WhatsApp and Twitter, Jack was at Netflix.
mhm,
And Akshaya is a much more product-minded engineer. He loves to think about how to close the gap between good software. He can write great software, but how do you close the gap between that and the user experience? And Jack is just this machine who loves to work on scalable backend systems. So that skill set was super complementary. And then I think in general, with these AI startups, one interesting observation I've had is, in this case, we backed a team that checks all the boxes. Yogi understands the domain, Akshay is the product manager engineer, Jack is this, back end machine. That's great. Um, I don't think you necessarily have to have all these things in place to back, another team in AI in general. In fact, um, there is something to be said about backing these AI native teams
mhm,
that are going after certain problem spaces where they may not have the domain expertise upfront, but they can build the right product, the right AI product that's needed for that space, and learn that expertise over time, versus necessarily doing what VCs have done for how many ever years, which is always back the person who's come from the domain. I think that paradigm is changing.
So you're saying like domain is good or not? Like, so you're saying
I'm
domain
saying,
is
I'm
not.
saying, I'm saying domain is. I think domain can matter in certain instances, like something as specific as accounting or law. I think it can matter, but even in law, you have counterexamples. We are very happy to be in business with Harvey, where Gabe, the CEO, was a lawyer, but there's a company called Legora, which is the number two player, and they don't come from the world of law, right? And then similarly with Traversal, we're extremely proud to be in business with them, but it's not like any of them they ever did the job of a site reliability engineer. However, they are extremely smart individuals who have done work in applied ML and causal inference, and were able to apply that skill set to build the right product for this domain and have learned the domain over time. So in other words, I think these AI native teams, you don't need to anchor on domain expertise to make an investment and feel good about it.
I wonder, so when you're thinking about like, I guess like maybe we could go back to a little bit of like the dev tool scenario. So like what are some stuff that you feel like are um interesting right now? Because I think one of the hottest topic right now for a lot of like our past guests, and then I think like you guys have back to like Parallel, which is like Parag's new company, and then I was at the Metronet I-40, and then I was listening to a talk like Parag was like giving. I think he was like emphasizing like the agent managed agent, or like the agent orchestration thing. Well, that was my takeaway from their panel, I think. So, and basically I guess like what's your perspective on like agent orchestration as a subsector, and then like what are some like new tools and like um I guess like a new engineering tools or like engineering like investing trend that you're seeing that's in the space?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll just take a step back and tell you about what's broadly interesting, which is, I mean, I think it's no secret that agents are at the cusp of entering enterprises everywhere, right?
Mhm,
But they are still not arguably ready for production use cases,
mhm,
uh, despite the building blocks being in place.
mhm,
And so there is an opportunity for builders and investors alike to invest in the scaffolding infrastructure that can make agents reliable.
mhm,
And there are primitives that can enable this. One of them is interfacing with the internet, which is, so we have a company called BrowserBase that has built agents that allow what the developers can spin up and conduct workflows on the internet. BrowserBase makes this scalable, right? And this is going to be a fundamental primitive because agents will need to be able to interface with the internet and do useful things. Parallel is a little bit of the reverse. Parallel indexes the web and brings it to agents, and that's because any AI application is going to have to refer to the internet in an effective and efficient way, and that's really just the problem Parallel is solving, right? It's going to be a core primitive for any agentic, any AI application.
mhm.
But there are other areas, right? Like you think about how do agent like can you agents are the first time we are releasing non-deterministic probabilistic software to enterprises. So how do you make sure that they are reliable? One way to do that is to run them through simulations of various scenarios, right? Like very can you synthetically generate like user scenarios that and then measure how an agent is performing on those, or like you know
I talked to a company last night just does this, but
yeah,
sorry.
this,
Going.
this this is a new space, right? And it's quite interesting because think of it as the evolution of CI/CD but for agents, right? CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous development. This is what your code and your system goes through every time when you're trying to push something from staging to production or development to staging.
Mhm,
Similarly, we're going to have an equivalent of this which is related to simulations but for agents.
mhm,
How do you run the agent through simulations, make sure the evaluation it hits a certain evaluation bar, and then you push it to production, right?
mhm,
So that will be a very exciting area to watch. A
mhm,
second exciting area would be what I call the semantic cache, or an AI native Redis, which is how do you make sure that these agentic systems can refer to past work that they have conducted
mhm,
versus burning tokens on inference for every new task. That's going to require some very interesting engineering problems to solve in terms of how do you design this semantic cache
mhm,
effectively, right? What does it mean for a cache hit? It's not going to be an exact match, it's going to be a semantic match. How do you fuse results from many different tasks of the past to inform how something should be done in the future? That's going to be a really fascinating primitive. I think evaluations in its own right will be a primitive. My take is that evaluations may not be a standalone category for startups, but will be baked in to something bigger, right? It could be baked into the simulation environments, it could be baked into something else, but it's going to be a primitive. And then, I think the last thing is security, right? Like, how do you make sure agents are secure? What does Okta look like for the age of agents? So that's just a rough sense of what I'm thinking about at the moment. And I think that's where there's going to be a lot of work and investment in the years to come.
I wonder since like you guys just let the I guess like the Series A for companies, and then I feel like the at the Series A stage, what are some benchmark that you are using to kind of like evaluate the companies? Because essentially I think like in the past, I believe it was like, I think for seed and like there's no like traditional benchmark, and then like for Series A, there's obviously like millions of revenue should or like millions of like ARR should already come in, especially for like the newer like AI companies. Like people are having like a single digit people team and then making like 9 million or something for as like the first year coming in. Sometimes like so how do you kind of like evaluate the companies based on like what kind of benchmark, like how much should they have generated, like in the ARR perspective?
Yeah, so we don't actually benchmark per se the ARR run rate, right? We have a rough sense of, obviously, if we see a company that has 10x, that is impressive
Yeah.
versus a company that is 2x ARR. But I still think what we care about is, does the company have the potential to be at 500 million of ARR and growing at hopefully 30% year over year? Because you look at the public markets and it's a very sobering story right now. There are companies that are north of a billion of ARR
Mhm.
growing quite nicely, and they get an okay multiple, right?
Mhm.
Versus the multiples that startups are getting today.
Mhm.
And again, I think what that informs is it's still more of an art than it is a science, in the form of can you make the case for why this will be an independent company that is generating ARR, at scale, and is
Mhm.
growing rapidly at scale, right? Even going from 1 to 10 or something like that is super impressive. But sometimes there are scenarios where we've seen companies that go from like 1 to 20, but then they suffer from churn, many months later, maybe even a year later. Things change in their market, and it turns out that the product that they built was not the stickiest. It didn't have real, defensibility behind it. So that's what we're scrutinizing. And then we're also scrutinizing the team, which comes back to the earlier conversation, which is this the right team to
Mhm.
build a company that matters here, and will they have the taste and the skill set to navigate the changes that are coming their way over every passing year. So that's if that I think the takeaway should be that it's still more of an art than it is a science. We will look at data, we will look at how people are using the product, we'll do the customer calls. These are all valuable inputs, but it fundamentally boils down to these two questions.
I wonder, so like on your checklist, beside the revenue or like, the team and the stuff, like, what is so how do you kind of like benchmark with their competitors? So some of the and then how long does it take you to like study one industry? So from like, accounting, like so like you probably have to talk to like let's call like 10, 20, or 40 companies in the space. And then like do you talk to like earlier or like later stage? I'm sure like probably the whole spectrum, but how do you make sure that they want to talk to you if they are not racing? And then if they are racing, like how do you like kind of like diligence if the metrics or like stuff that they kind of like send you is kind of like verified?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of them talking to us, it helps to be at a place like Kleiner Perkins. I found that founders typically want to talk to us, and one of the reasons is that we now have a reputation for really moving the needle for all of our portfolio companies,
Mhm.
which is nice because then our portfolio founders will talk about us in the market and talk about how we've been, one of the most valuable partners, if not the most valuable partner to them on their cap table.
Mhm.
So I think that reputation has helped us a lot, and it's again due to us wanting to do right by our founders all the time. Um, I think in terms of how do you pick, you have to always survey the landscape. You have to, generally speaking, you have to meet other companies in a specific space that you're looking at before making the case for one. Sometimes you just meet that one founder or one team where you're like, this is the team, like I would want to back them at all costs. Like I don't care what anyone else is doing, they just have all the right ingredients in place to build a massive company in the space.
Mhm.
You can typically get away with that if in that category it's still early, like there isn't a startup that is provably broken out, and someone asks you the question of, hey, like why won't that company continue to win, right? That's an easy situation. I think in situations where you have some companies that are at scale, it's harder to make the case for an early stage company, right? So then you have to meet them from the perspective of a growth investment. um, you know you, you- but when push comes to shove, I think the team will be the guiding light, right? There are some teams where you're just like, there's something about this team that I want to be in business with, right? And I think that generally allows you to kind of converge onto the one that you end up picking, right, ahead of the traction.
Mhm. What do you think is like something that like people overvalue? What do you think people undervalue?
um, I still think people overvalue traction, and I think they undervalue team, like the DNA of the team that's required to build the standalone company in a space.
For the team, so like I wonder, so like how do you source the I mean obviously with the Kleiner brand it's like very obvious, like can attract a lot of people, but like how do you think about like building up your own like network, the sourcing network for like the I guess not the second time founder, but it's more like the experience books? Because I think there is like it's like an angel investor myself. Like I feel like there's like kind of like three category of people, right? Like one's like the the rubric alumni who is like IPO'd founder like crowd, right? And then one is like the experienced people. They're like the founding engineer, the VP, the director of engineering from like a big company, and then now like came out and do their own stuff. And then there is the third category are the YC founder, Z fellow, like these like unproven, but like, drop out of from MIT or something. Like, the third pillar is kind of the outlier industry.
Yeah.
So it's like from these like three major network, like which one do you feel like have the better chance to succeed in your opinion? And like how do you kind of like build up the sourcing funnel from these companies? And then also some of them, like the big tech squad, they may not be like great founders because they actually have no clue on how to build a brand. How do you even like put together your accounting software? They just like work, they're great engineers, but like they may never done like a company from scratch before, right? So like how do you kind of that like these people, like who's actually gonna win?
Yeah, and again, I think it comes to, you could say, like, how do you assess people, and that is very hard. I think that's a journey for any investor, especially every early stage investor, and you hope to get it right, more than 70% of the time, but like, that it is really hard. So I'll start with that. I think the second thing is, with sourcing, um, is just a mix of, over time you've met enough companies in the past,
Mhm,
you've hopefully given them a good experience, they will introduce you to their friends that are building companies, right? So a lot of, a good amount of my deal flow will be inbound from founders, from people in my network that I've coincided with, intersected with, for very various reasons. And I think, and then the other part of this is just outbound, right? You hear about a founder or someone who's leaving a company, start something new, um, and then you just outreach them. And I found that thoughtful outreach is, it sounds simple, but like,
mhm,
if you can reach out with some, with some sharp points of view on the space they're building in, that's almost guaranteed to get you a meeting. So
mhm,
I think that's, you just need to show founders that you are thinking, deeply about what they're trying to build, and can have a high bandwidth conversation. And then of course, it helps to have a brand like Kleiner,
mhm,
behind you. And then but funnily enough, I've actually found it harder to get meetings with Z fellows and, some of the younger founders, because they are swamped by VCs, versus getting meetings with the more experienced folks. That's just, it's just funny. It's something I was thinking about the other day. And look, I think, like, in terms of how you pick, I think there's no formula, right? So it's going to be, as they say, your taste. But I like backing, personally, I like backing, founders who not just have, demonstrated clarity of thought, but are earnest. So founders who I believe I can have a very strong, intellectually honest dialogue with, where
mhm,
they will tell me the good and tell me the bad, and they'll be receptive to hearing feedback about things that they can do better,
mhm,
versus trying to put on some kind of show, some kind of act. Because, and by the way, some of those founders can end up doing very well in their own right. It's just that I gravitate towards the earnest founder.
mhm. For sure. I wonder, so like, what is your AI stack to track these people? Since you are a builder yourself, like, I'm sure you probably build your own AI agent to like, I don't know if you're one of the people who like, use like one of these stealth tools to track like anyone who turned like stealth from like, company XYZ, and then now it's like, on the hunt. But like, how do you kind of like track this? And also like, okay, I have a question on the profile of the engineers. So like, obviously the Maxima people are from like, VP of Eng at Bold, and then like director from Netflix. Like, what is the right profile? Like, is that the director? Is that the PM? Is that like, um, VP of engineering? Like, I mean, obviously, I'm sure like it varies, or like, it has like some sort of like context for everybody, but like, what do you see the biggest success are coming from, and what type of profile and what level of the company, right? I think Bolt is uh, a newer company, but it's very like hot these days. And then the other one is like an older company, but like it's been there for a while. Like, so how do you think about the profile of the company as well?
Um, yeah. So in terms of AI tools, I used to have scripts that would do some of the things you mentioned, but, I found that actually all of that is being layered into existing tools already. So
Yeah.
so whether it's a juice box or a harmonic, or whatnot, like, you have the tools out there that can do this for you. But for what it's worth, I don't think there's much alpha in these tools to begin with. I think a lot of the, the sourcing alpha, quote unquote, is from introductions. That's just truly how you get in front of the, the right people at the right time. And then I think in just terms of backgrounds, like again, there's no right background as you called out, but you want to find people who have done the work before, right? So maybe not a big tech, director, because they may not have built product or shipped anything in a long time, right? That skill set is it's good for its own, for within the confines of big tech, but it may not be, it probably is not what you need to build a startup. And so people who have demonstrated that they have done the work before, but then also have the X factor to be able to build a team around them. Why should people want to work for these people, right? I think that's another question, and that will show up in the form of demonstrated leadership.
I wonder, maybe we could talk about like, I guess like when you are building the relationships, maybe we could start from the first like relationship into venture. So like a lot of people work at Google, but like, not many people successfully transition into venture, and then with a big firm, especially like, how did you first like encounter like Mamoon or like, the Kleiner people, and how did the relationship kind of like fostering into like a principal position at the firm?
Yeah, so I've known what venture capital is. I didn't know it super well, but it's not. I knew what a venture capitalist was,
Mhm,
even when I was in college, and I knew who Kleiner Perkins was uh, as I was entering college. Like that was just something I knew because I'd read the Google book many years prior, and then of course John Doerr and Kleiner Perkins was mentioned in that book. In college, I applied to be a Kleiner Perkins fellow, and
mhm,
I was able to become a Kleiner Perkins fellow as part of the third class.
mhm,
This is a fellowship that's still running strong today at Kleiner Perkins, where we
mhm,
handpick about 50 kids from colleges across the country and put them in portfolio companies of ours as interns. And then we organize programming where they can all mingle with each other and meet folks at KP. It's one of the best internship programs, and I had the time of my life as a Kleiner Perkins fellow. Because of that, I was in their database of alumni.
mhm,
And at some point, one of the people running the program reached out to me for a product role at one of Mamoon's companies.
mhm,
And it was like great timing because I had been thinking about what I wanted to do next post Google. And I had already converged in my mind that I wanted to move into investing. I'd been angel investing post Palantir going public. I've generally been interested in investing on the side. I have my own stock portfolio. It felt like the right time for me to transition in a venture. So when she reached out to me, we caught up, and she said she was trying to pitch this product role. I said, hey, actually, I'm thinking about moving into VC, and I've already started lining up a few interviews. She said, oh, that's great to hear. You have to meet Mamoon because we are opportunistically looking. And I got to meet Mamoon, and I think we both hit it off in that first conversation. And I'm very grateful that he took an interest and brought me on. I think 2 months later.
mhm. I wonder, so like, did you had to source, let's call it like 50 deals or something, or like what was the kind of like evaluation process on like the deal sentiment? And obviously you invested like AML, infra, and security, also like some of like consumer stuff. Why don't we talk about like your original thesis, and then how did that kind of like play into investing in the future companies?
Not my recruiting, but just my original thesis from back in the day.
Yeah, yeah. Thesis back in the day, and then also I guess like from not recruiting, but like I guess like from like the evaluation perspective, like you mentioned about like it was like 2 month process of like you hit it off, but like it was like it takes a minute to like actually join the firm, right? So a lot of people are curious about like in even in my network, so like I've been coaching the younger people who like just graduated from like Berkeley or something to like get a job in VC, and people were saying I was like, oh yeah, you can like send deals to like them, like stuff like that, but like a lot of people were like, yeah, I sent like 5 deals and there was like no, absolutely nothing here back, or like it's cricket, or like to some sort of degree that's like it's not moving forward. So like what would be your suggestion for the people that are like in that position to like becoming like a free scout basically, and then it was like not pan out?
So I'll say a couple of things. First of all, one of the things that I admire the most about Mamoon, and also one of the reasons I think he's one of the greats, is that he takes a very people first approach to his
Mhm.
evaluation. And so with me, I had to do a case study on a company and make a recommendation whether we should invest or not invest. And that case study required me to go through some data, understand the space the company was in, and turn around an investment memo in about, like, I think 2 weeks. But beyond that, Mamoon, and then at some point other people on the team, Mamoon in particular just spent time getting to know me. Like, he just wanted to understand my intentions, my background, um, probe me in different ways, but it never felt transactional. It never felt like, hey, you need to show me what you're sourcing. I do remember writing an email to him and Ilya at some point in my process with some companies I'd met and why I thought they were interesting. They never asked for it, but and I wonder how much it contributed to my process. But fundamentally, Mamoon took a very people first approach, and I think that's why I knew instantly I wanted to be at this place if I got an offer.
Mhm.
There were some other firms that did explicitly ask me for deal flow, and
Mhm.
I did send them some deal flow. I didn't interview with many places. I think I interviewed with like three, maybe four. I got the KP process went very quickly, but two of those places did ask me for some deal flow. I sent one round of deals. They asked for more. I sent another round of deals, and then in one case they wanted to move forward. In another case, they just did not respond to me. I don't think that's. I think anyone who is interviewing candidates through that lens, that's not the right way to do it. It's just my humble opinion. I think you need to figure out if the person has what you're looking for in the form of raw material and EQ to be a good culture fit and also do the job over the long run. Because you have to assume that if they have those things, they will find deal flow when they're in your ecosystem.
How do you benchmark the data? You mentioned about like you did a case study and then they kind of like throw some data at you and then you kind of like research the subject and then like, how do you benchmark the data? So for example, say you have like the data room of like accounting software and then like how do you know that like if they are making the right margin and then the right kind of like business model to compete with the rest of the team and then like how do you like for example if you never have like a accounting friend no experience whatsoever how do you diligence the deal is that like you cold outreach to your like people's like accounting firms on Yelp or like how do you kind of like actually diligence the space that like you may not have like any previous background in like a really fast turnaround.
Um, well, so this is while I'm a KP or before I was a KP?
I think I was just saying I think it can be both, right? I think it's the job itself is kind of the same, right?
Yeah, so I think one way to do this is you can go through expert networks to talk to people who are buyers of software in that broader space, right? Typically, in almost like 90% or more of categories, there's some incumbent, or there's maybe some startup that has tried to do this in the past, or even is doing it but is not yet broken out. So you can, I think, talking to users and customers of that software through these expert networks can be very helpful. So I think that can start, and if you ask the right questions, and you can start to get up to speed on just the what value do these products provide very quickly. And then I think you marry that with a mix of nowadays you can obviously with ChatGPT learn a lot very quickly. And then yes, you do have to ping your networks, right? And hopefully over time you've met enough people. There's enough diversity in your network that you can ping folks. It can be founders, it can be people who are working with companies that you work closely with. I think that can compound, right? So you just get on the phone with them and then refine your understanding, right, of the overall space.
Mm. Before you can afford like I think the expert network because that's like $600 per hour or something like that. I mean I am an expert in the expert network
Yeah.
sometimes. So like when like so like how would you kind of like get the kind of intel on like how is people buying and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, ideally you can like ping your founder network and like the companies you work with in the portfolio, and get like a pulse check, maybe get in front of one or two folks for that specific function, and talk to them, right? And if it sounds interesting, then maybe you can rely on the expert networks. uh, yeah, look, I think the short answer is that when you have been doing this job for, let's say, over a year and a half, you've met enough people and you've started to build enough. I've been doing it for now 3.5 years. Like, you've met enough people and you have enough of a network that there are people who you can ping and people who are very happy to get on the phone with you and help you out. And then from there, you can then overlay it with the expert networks, right? And that should get you 80% of the way there, I would say, in terms of understanding.
Mhm. What would you say is like one thing that you learned from Mamoon? You mentioned about like he is taking like very people approach, like for example, I think the other part is like for the younger partner or like younger principal, like people when people are like kind of working with the more like generational partners, like it's like a lot of times like you have to do the sourcing, diligencing, and everything else. Like, how do they process the information when you kind of hand them like your thesis, and is there like any particular feedback that kind of like it really kind of like struck you to some degree in a way that you find surprising, or what are, or like would it be like 99% it's like, oh, like, oh yeah, okay, great, let's move forward with blah blah blah, like how, what were some like kind of feedback that you've heard were kind of like new to you?
Yeah, I think obviously every generational investor is different. The hallmark of Mamoon's investing style is that he has impeccable taste across the dimensions of team, market, and product. That's so that in general, that is, those are the three variables, and he has just great taste around that. And I wouldn't say any feedback has been surprising, but it's been good to see how where his instincts fire versus not on a specific opportunity, and then using my own analysis and synthesis to find the common threads across those where he got interested versus did not, and but then not obviously letting that define me, because I want to have my own instincts and my own style, but having it be an input. And one example of this is, I think for founders, he's looking for founders that have that clarity of thought, the founders who are earnest, the founders who he thinks can hire a good team. And I think that's generally something that I agree with. And then I'll also think about, would I be proud to put those founders in front of our CIO network, uh,
Mhm.
because I know that they can deliver, right? Like, I think that's one example. I think on data, he was very helpful in terms of just helping me understand, at least for application companies, what's the data that matters, right? Like, things like DAO, like the L28, just generally appreciating engagement data more. I think that's been how he's done a lot of his great investments, and that was new. Uh, and then for market opportunities, he just has a great feel. There are many times when he just has like, I think it's very instinctual. So you just have to tease apart what you can, and then just chart your own course.
For sure. What is so like since you have interact with a lot of like the infra dev tool, like everything across AI, what do you think is like the biggest wave next year? Because I think this year has already been kind of like agent dominant. So even for our own like conference, like like basically all the investors and founders, everybody want to speak on the agent panel. Like, so I guess like what do you think of would be the next year's like big wave in the AI space?
I still think there's a lot to do with the data center. This is not a new wave, but it's like an underexploited wave,
Mhm.
which is, you still have so much capex that's going into the data center, but we are yet to see startups that take on the incumbents. A lot of the value is accruing to the public market companies, right? So networking,
Mhm.
it's still accruing to NVIDIA and Arista networks. And storage, it's accruing to the Seagates and the Pure Storages of the world. So we need more startups that go after this opportunity, right? And I think I hope that ends up being the case. We are in business with a company called Nextop, which is a team out of Arista Networks, and they are challenging Arista and NVIDIA in networking. But we need more such teams that are going after storage and other aspects of the data center. Certain chips that complement the GPU. I think that will be one interesting area. I would also, by the way, argue that, look, like, everyone's talking about agents, but the scaffolding infrastructure that I mentioned is very nascent. I haven't seen many companies building the things that we talked about earlier. So I hope that is a wave that we see next year. Because, again, if you look at the way the last 3 years and the way it's played out, most of the activity and the value has been with applications, at least in the private markets. you haven't really seen many infrastructure companies do well, right? Like the ones that have done well are the inference providers and the ones, reselling compute. But in terms of tooling and just things that make these applications more robust, there hasn't really been like an exciting category, so to speak, that's taken off. And I expect that to change because these agentic applications are just much more complicated than these Copilot style applications that we've seen so far.
Mm, for sure. I can you like maybe unpack a little bit on the data center piece, and then before we wrap with like fire run. Yeah, because I think that's such an interesting take. Because a lot of times, like people kind of ignore the infra side because nowadays it's like oh apps, and so maybe we could talk about the data center piece as well as like you mentioned about like the like right now a lot of people are doing basically in the neo cloud space, like reselling GPUs and stuff. Um, your investment together AI, which is like in that space, and like how do you think about going forward? You mentioned about like data and then tooling. Maybe we could start with like let's call it like maybe one company that you are looking at. It doesn't have to be. We don't have to say the name or anything, but like if there's any particular company or interesting like like business model slash like product that you're looking at right now.
Yeah, I'll just maybe just like answer the broader thematic question, which is, if you look at the infra stack, there's the chips, then you have the data center, then you have the cloud service providers,
Mhm,
or the LMs, and then you have the cloud service providers, right? Those are the four foundational layers.
mhm,
Um, at the cloud layer, we're invested in together, and they are one of the leading providers of optimized inference
mhm,
for any open source model that you want to use in your application. I think what's happening is we're moving from this world where you can ask ChatGPT a question and it gives you an answer very quickly
mhm,
to a world where you ask a question and it's using the reasoning models under the hood to think and burn a lot of inference tokens, but give you a much higher quality answer.
mhm,
And if that's true, it's going to mean that inference demand is only going to explode in a non-linear way, which I think is a consensus view, by the way,
mhm,
which means that we're probably going to want to have a reasoning cloud. So a cloud that is specifically optimizing the way inference is performed,
mhm,
and then builds a lot of nice developer abstractions on top of that. I haven't seen a company specifically building a reasoning cloud, but I'd love to meet one, because there's a lot to optimize there, and arguably it is going to be riding on this secular trend of reasoning models taking over.
mhm,
Um, and then I think just in terms of data center stuff, like it again boils down to the amount of capex that's flowing into all of the IT infrastructure and IT equipment that goes into making AI workloads possible, right?
mhm,
And networking is a big piece. I think networking is an under discussed topic. Like, I'm very excited about the prospects of our company Next Hop, but arguably, like this is going to be a tide that lifts all boats. Like Arista Networks, in 5 years, it is not financial advice, but like it could very well be like a $300 billion company, right? Like this is just, you fundamentally need to change the way networking is done to make these large scale training and inference workloads work and perform. Storage, right? Like you need to basically, like the data sets are getting much more massive. You have lots of unstructured data. How do you make sure that you can query that data efficiently and pass them around GPUs in a fast and seamless way? Like you just need new infrastructure for that. So that's those are the areas I'm like just very intrigued by, but at the same time it'll take a very specific skill set to pull it off, right? With Nextop, the company taking on Arista, this is a team out of Arista Networks, like they know networking inside out. So
mhm.
I can count on my fingers a number of people who can do the same thing for storage and for specific kinds of chips. I'll be on the lookout for those people, but yeah, that there's a lot to be done to retool the foundational infrastructure.
For sure. Well, um, I want to wrap with a one minute fire because I want to be mindful of the time. Okay, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is 0 to 1.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would invite Richard Feynman.
He's a popular guest too. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Mamoon at Kleiner Perkins.
Where can we find you outside of work?
On the squash courts, on the poker table, on the chessboard.
That sounds like a major VC networking trend.
I play the guitar too, actually. So maybe even at a concert. I used to be a part of a band, and I play lead guitar. I've been playing heavy metal for 15 years. So maybe at some point I'll get the band together, and you can find us at a concert.
Amazing. Well, I did. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Thanks so much, Grace.
Let me quickly